This is HOA Karen gets denied. She used safety as an excuse to control my yard. Your excuses are not my problem. Laura Roberts shouted it across my front yard while jabbing her finger at the orange-flagged survey stakes I had just hammered into the dirt that morning. She stood 3 feet from my property line, holding a laminated policy sheet like a shield, her face red and her voice loud enough that the neighbor 2 doors down stopped trimming his hedge to watch. I had moved into Pinecrest Village exactly 11 days ago, and this was the 3rd time she had shown up unannounced to tell me I was doing something wrong. I work nights as a restaurant manager, so I had been up since 6 that morning waiting for the surveyor to finish marking the corners. The stakes were fresh, the flags were bright, and the survey report was still warm from the printer in my truck. Laura did not care. She said the HOA did not recognize my survey stakes and she would remove them herself if I did not move them back 3 feet. I asked her why she thought the stakes were wrong. She said because the fence I was planning would block the sightline for the amenity access road, which was not even on my side of the property. I told her the survey company was licensed by the state and the report matched the county plat. She waved the laminated sheet and said the HOA had its own standards, and my surveyor was clearly incompetent. I had just signed a 15-year mortgage and I could not afford to lose this place or get dragged into court over a fence that was not even built yet. I told Laura I would show her the survey report. She said she did not need to see it because the HOA Compliance Committee had already reviewed the area last month and determined that any fence installation within 10 feet of the access road would require a variance hearing. I asked when that review happened. She said it was confidential. I asked if there was a written record. She said the minutes were internal and I was not entitled to them until I formally requested them through the management company, which could take up to 30 days. I said my fence materials were being delivered in 2 days and I needed to start digging post holes tomorrow. She smiled and said if I started digging without HOA approval, she would mark the materials as illegal dumping and have them towed immediately. I am standing there with a bag of screws in my pocket and a level clip to my belt, staring at a woman who just threatened to tow $800 of lumber and concrete before I even got it off the truck. Laura turned and walked back toward her golf cart, which was parked on the curb with a blinking amber light on the roof, like she was running some kind of municipal patrol. She called back over her shoulder that the compliance committee would be watching, and I should expect a formal notice if I proceeded without written authorization. I asked who was on the compliance committee. She said she was the chair, and that was all I needed to know. The next morning, I called the management company and asked for a copy of the covenant restrictions on fencing. The woman on the phone said she would email them within 48 hours. I said I needed them today because my delivery was tomorrow. She said the office was short-staffed and she could not guarantee same-day turnaround. I asked if there was a fence height limit in the covenants. She said she could not answer specific questions without reviewing the file. I asked if I could come to the office and look at the file myself. She said the office was closed to walk-ins due to security concerns. I hung up and called the surveyor. He said the stakes were placed according to the recorded plat, and if anyone moved them, it would be vandalism. He also said he had worked in Billings for 12 years, and he had never heard of an HOA rejecting a licensed survey. I asked him if he could send me a letter confirming the accuracy of the stakes. He said he would email it that afternoon. I went outside to take photos of the stakes and the property line. A neighbor I had never met was standing on his porch watching. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a flannel shirt and holding a coffee mug. He nodded at me and said he had heard Laura yelling the day before. I walked over and introduced myself. He said his name was Dennis and he had lived in Pinecrest Village for 8 years. I asked him if the HOA was always this aggressive. He said Laura had been president for 3 years and she ran the place like a parole officer. He said she used amenities lockouts as punishment, and if you crossed her, she would bury you in notices until you either gave up or moved. I asked if anyone had ever fought back. He said one guy tried to challenge a landscaping fine 2 years ago, and Laura responded by sending him a new violation notice every week for 6 months until he paid the original fine just to make it stop. Dennis said he kept copies of the actual covenants in his house because Laura liked to invent rules that were not written anywhere. He offered to bring them over. I said yes. 20 minutes later, Dennis came back with a 3-ring binder full of printed covenants, amendments, and meeting minutes going back 10 years. He flipped to the fencing section and showed me the rules. Fences were allowed. Maximum height was 6 feet. Setback from the property line was 0 as long as the fence was on your side. No mention of access roads, no mention of variance hearings, no mention of compliance committee pre-approval. I asked Dennis if he was sure this was the current version. He said he had requested a certified copy from the county recorder last year after Laura tried to fine him for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of brown. The county copy matched his binder. I asked him if Laura knew he had this. He said she did, and she hated him for it. Dennis said if I started building the fence, Laura would escalate fast. He said she had a pattern. First, she would take a staged photo to make it look worse than it was. Then she would threaten to tow something. Then she would lock you out of the amenities until you complied. He said the amenities lockout was her favorite because it was not technically a fine, so she did not have to go through the management company to impose it. She just changed your gate code and told you it was for non-compliance. I asked if that was legal. He said probably not, but most people did not have the time or money to fight it, so they just folded. Dennis said if I wanted to win, I needed to document everything and copy the entire neighborhood on every interaction, so Laura could not control the narrative. He said the HOA had an email list and I should get on it. I thanked Dennis and went back inside. My phone buzzed. Email from the management company. Covenant PDF attached. I opened it. Same rules Dennis had shown me. No variance requirement. No compliance pre-approval. I forwarded the email to myself 3 times and printed 2 copies. Then I sent a polite email to Laura with the covenant language attached and a note saying I would be proceeding with the fence installation starting tomorrow per the recorded rules. I copied the management company. I did not get a reply. The delivery truck arrived at 7 in the morning. I had taken the day off work to be there. The driver backed into my driveway and started unloading fence panels, posts, bags of concrete mix, and a bundle of 2x4s. I was signing the delivery receipt when Laura's golf cart pulled up with the amber light flashing. She got out, walked straight to the pile of materials on my driveway, and took a photo with her phone. I asked her what she was doing. She said she was documenting the unauthorized dumping. I said it was not dumping, it was a delivery to my property. She said the materials were in violation of HOA storage rules, and I had 24 hours to remove them, or she would report them to the county as abandoned property. I asked which rule. She pulled out the laminated sheet and waved it, but did not let me read it. She said temporary storage of construction materials required a permit from the compliance committee, and I had not applied for one. I told Laura I had reviewed the covenants, and there was no such permit requirement. She said the permit process was adopted at the last board meeting, and I would have known that if I had attended. I asked when the meeting was. She said 3 weeks ago. I said I was not living here 3 weeks ago. She said ignorance of the rules was not an excuse. I said the covenants required 30 days notice for any rule changes, and the management company had to mail them to all homeowners. She said the notice was posted on the clubhouse bulletin board, and that satisfied the requirement. I said I had never been inside the clubhouse. She said that was my problem. Then she got back in the golf cart and drove away. I called Dennis. He came over and looked at the materials. He said Laura was bluffing about the dumping report because the county would not respond to an HOA complaint about materials on private property unless they were blocking a right-of-way. He also said he had attended the board meeting 3 weeks ago and there was no vote on a storage permit. He said Laura liked to claim things were decided in meetings that never happened. I asked him if he took notes. He said he did, and he would send them to me. I asked him if he would be willing to testify to that if it came to a hearing. He said absolutely. I spent the rest of the morning marking post holes with spray paint. I used the survey stakes as my guide and double-checked every measurement with a tape measure. The fence line ran parallel to the street and ended at the back corner of my lot, about 60 feet total. The access road Laura kept mentioning was on the other side of the street and had nothing to do with my property. I took photos of every spray-painted mark and every measurement. I uploaded them to a cloud folder and tagged them with timestamps. Then I went inside and wrote an email to the HOA board with the subject line Fence Installation Notice and a summary of the project, the survey report, the covenant language, and a statement that I would begin digging post holes tomorrow morning. I attached the photos and the surveyor's letter. I copied the management company and Dennis. I hit send. At 4 in the afternoon, I got a reply from Laura. Subject line: violation notice. Body: you are in violation of Pinecrest Village Fence Compliance Association rules regarding unauthorized construction. Effective immediately, your amenities access is suspended pending compliance review. A formal hearing will be scheduled within 14 days. Failure to cease construction will result in additional penalties, including fines, legal action, and referral to county code enforcement. She signed it, HOA President Laura Roberts, Compliance Committee Chair. I forwarded the email to Dennis. He called me 2 minutes later. He said this was classic Laura. She was trying to force me to stop by cutting off my access to the pool, gym, and clubhouse before the hearing even happened. He said the covenant required a hearing before any penalty could be imposed, and amenities suspension counted as a penalty. He said I should reply and state that I was proceeding with the fence per the covenants, and I would attend the hearing to address any concerns. He also said I should file a complaint with the management company about the premature suspension. I did both. I got an auto reply from the management company saying they would respond within 5 business days. That night I went to the clubhouse to test my gate code. The keypad blinked red and did not open. I tried it 3 times. Still red. I took a video of the keypad with my phone, showing the red blinks and the timestamp. Then I walked around the building and checked the back entrance. Same thing. Laura had already locked me out. I drove home and added the video to my evidence folder. I sent another email to the management company with the video attached and a note that I was being unlawfully denied access to common amenities without due process. I copied Dennis and the full HOA board email list that Dennis had given me earlier. The next morning, I rented a post-hole auger and started digging. The auger was loud, gas-powered, and it threw dirt everywhere. I was halfway through the first hole when Laura's golf cart appeared again. She parked on the street and walked onto my driveway. She did not say anything at first. She just stood there with her arms crossed, watching me dig. I turned off the auger. She said I was in violation of the cease and desist order. I said there was no cease and desist order, only an email. She said the email constituted an official order and I was ignoring it. I said I was proceeding under the covenants and I would address her concerns at the hearing. She said there would not be a hearing because I was going to stop now. I said no. She pulled out her phone and made a call. 5 minutes later, a tow truck pulled onto my street. The driver got out and talked to Laura. She pointed at my materials pile and said something I could not hear. The driver walked over to me and said he had a call to remove abandoned construction materials. I said the materials were not abandoned, they were mine, and they were on my property. He said the HOA reported them as a hazard. I said the HOA did not have authority to tow materials off private property. He shrugged and said he was just doing his job. I asked him who called it in. He said a woman named Laura Roberts. I told him to call his dispatcher and confirm that Laura had legal authority to order a tow from my driveway. He made the call. He talked for a minute, then hung up and told Laura that dispatch needed written authorization from the property owner or a law enforcement officer before they could proceed. Laura's face went red. She said this was an HOA matter and the tow company had a contract with Pinecrest Village. The driver said the contract covered common areas, not private driveways. He got back in his truck and left. Laura turned to me and said, "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink." Then she got in the golf cart and drove away. Dennis came outside and asked what happened. I told him. He laughed and said Laura just tried the tow trick on someone last year and it did not work then either. He said she was running out of moves and that meant she would start getting creative. He said to watch for staged photos and surprise inspections. I thanked him and went back to digging. I finished the post holes by noon. I mixed the concrete and set the posts before the sun went down. The fence line was clean, level, and exactly on my property, according to the survey. I took photos of every post. I measured the height, the spacing, and the setback from the property line. Everything was within the covenant limits. I uploaded the photos to my evidence folder and sent another update email to the board with photos attached. I got no reply. At 10 that night, I heard a noise outside. I looked out the front window and saw Laura standing on the sidewalk with a flashlight, shining it at my fence posts and taking photos with her phone. I opened the door and asked her what she was doing. She said she was conducting a routine compliance inspection. I said it was 10 at night and she was not allowed on my property without permission. She said the sidewalk was public and she could inspect from there. I said she was harassing me. She said she was doing her job. I pulled out my phone and started recording. She saw the camera and walked back to her golf cart. I kept recording until she drove away. Then I saved the video and added it to my evidence folder. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead with Laura's signature at the bottom. The notice said I was in violation of setback requirements, height requirements, and unapproved construction procedures. It listed a fine schedule: $250 for the first day, $500 for the second day, and $1,000 per day thereafter until compliance was achieved. The notice said the fines would be added to my HOA account and would accrue interest at 18% per year until paid. It also said the HOA had placed a lien on my property pending resolution. I took a photo of the notice and called Dennis. Dennis came over and read the notice. He said Laura was making it up as she went. He said the covenants did not allow fines without a hearing, and liens required a court order. He said the 18% interest rate was illegal under Montana law, and the HOA could not just decide to lien someone's property because they did not like a fence. I asked him what I should do. He said file a formal complaint with the management company, send a cease and desist letter to Laura, and keep building the fence. He also said I should talk to a lawyer. I said I could not afford a lawyer. He said call one anyway and ask for a free consult. Most of them would give you 20 minutes if it was an HOA case. I called 3 lawyers that afternoon. The first one said he did not handle HOA cases. The second one said he would take the case but wanted a $5,000 retainer. The third one said she would talk to me for free, and if the case was strong, she might take it on contingency. I sent her the full evidence folder. She called me back 2 hours later and said Laura was violating multiple sections of Montana HOA law, and if I wanted to fight this, she could file a complaint with the county and possibly get an injunction. I asked how long that would take. She said 4 to 6 weeks. I said I did not have 4 to 6 weeks because Laura was threatening to tow my materials and my fence delivery window was closing. She said the best move was to finish the fence as fast as possible and document every interaction so that when we went to court, we had a clear record of harassment. I said okay. I spent the next 2 days installing the fence panels. I worked 12-hour shifts and finished the entire run by the end of the weekend. The fence was 6 feet tall, pressure-treated pine with black metal post caps. It looked good. It was straight, level, and inside my property line by 6 inches. I took final photos from every angle and sent them to the lawyer. She said it looked solid, and Laura would have a hard time claiming any violation. I asked her what would happen next. She said Laura would probably escalate to something stupid, and that would give us leverage. She told me to keep recording everything. Monday morning, I got another email from Laura. Subject line, emergency board meeting. Body, an emergency board meeting has been called to address ongoing violations at your property. The meeting will be held tonight at 7 in the clubhouse. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to attend will be considered an admission of guilt, and the board will proceed with enforcement actions including fines, liens, and legal referral. I forwarded the email to the lawyer. She said I should attend and bring all my evidence. She also said I should record the meeting if Montana was a one-party consent state. I looked it up. It was. I charged my phone and made sure I had space for a long recording. At 6:30, I drove to the clubhouse. My gate code still did not work. I had to wait by the front door until another resident came out and I caught the door. Inside, the meeting room had a folding table set up at the front with 3 chairs. Laura was sitting in the middle chair with 2 other board members I had never met. About 10 residents were scattered in the audience chairs. Dennis was in the back row. He nodded at me. I sat next to him. Laura started the meeting without any preamble. She said the board had received multiple complaints about my fence, and the purpose of tonight was to determine the appropriate enforcement action. I raised my hand and asked who filed the complaints. She said the complaints were confidential. I asked if I could see them. She said no. If you are enjoying this, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA stories where the tyrants get what they deserve. Laura said the board had determined that my fence violated the setback requirement because it was not 10 feet from the access road. I said the access road was across the street and had nothing to do with my property. She said the covenant language was ambiguous and the board had the authority to interpret it. I pulled out the printed covenants and read the fencing section out loud. It said nothing about access roads. Laura said the board had adopted a clarifying amendment at the meeting 3 weeks ago. I asked for a copy of the amendment. She said it was in the meeting minutes and I could request them from the management company. Dennis stood up and said he was at that meeting and there was no vote on any amendment. Laura said Dennis was mistaken. Dennis said he had notes. Laura said notes were not official records. I said I had filed a formal complaint with the management company about the amenities lockout and I wanted to know why my access was still suspended. Laura said the lockout was temporary, pending the outcome of tonight's hearing. I said the covenant required access to remain active until a hearing decision was issued in writing. She said the board had emergency powers to suspend access if there was an immediate safety concern. I asked what the safety concern was. She said unauthorized construction posed a risk to neighborhood property values. I said property values were not a safety issue. She said the board had discretion to determine what constituted a safety issue. Dennis said that was not in the covenants. Laura told him to sit down. The other 2 board members had not said a word. One of them was a thin man in his 50s who kept looking at his phone. The other was a woman in her 40s who looked uncomfortable. I asked if they had reviewed my evidence packet. They both looked at Laura. Laura said the board had reviewed all relevant materials, and the decision was that I needed to remove the fence within 7 days, or the HOA would pursue legal action and daily fines would continue to accrue. I said the fence was legal and I was not removing it. Laura said then we would see each other in court. She banged a gavel on the table and said the meeting was adjourned. I walked out with Dennis. He said that was the worst board meeting he had ever seen, and he had seen a lot of bad ones. He said Laura had no case, and the lawyer would shred her in court. I said I hoped so. Dennis said he would write a statement about the meeting and the non-existent amendment vote and send it to me. I thanked him. The next morning I got an email from the management company. Subject line: HOA compliance matter. Body: we have received your complaint regarding amenities access suspension. We are reviewing the matter and will respond within 10 business days. Please note that the board has the authority to suspend access for non-compliance, and your complaint does not automatically restore access. If you have questions, please contact the board directly. I forwarded the email to the lawyer. She said the management company was covering for Laura and we should expect them to slow roll everything. She also said she was preparing a demand letter to the board and the management company requiring them to restore my access, drop the fines, and cease all harassment. She said she would send it by the end of the week. I went to work that night and came home at 2 in the morning. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw that one of my fence panels was on the ground. The screws had been removed and the panel was leaning against the fence line. I got out of the truck and looked around. No one was outside. I checked the other panels. They were fine. I picked up the fallen panel and saw that the screw holes were clean, not stripped. Someone had unscrewed it deliberately. I took photos and called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher said an officer would come by in the morning to take a report. The officer showed up at 8. I showed him the panel and the photos. He said it looked like vandalism and he would file a report. I asked him if there were any cameras in the neighborhood that might have caught it. He said the HOA might have cameras on the clubhouse, but I would have to request the footage. I said the HOA president was the one harassing me. He said then I should file for a restraining order if I had evidence of repeated trespassing. I said I had video of her on my property at night. He said bring it to the courthouse and file. I said I would. I reinstalled the panel and added 2 extra screws per board. Then I set up a motion-activated camera on my front porch aimed at the fence. I ordered it online and had it delivered same day. By noon, the camera was live and uploading to cloud storage. I sent an email to Laura with the police report attached and a note that I had installed security cameras and any further tampering would be reported immediately. I copied the board and the management company. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "You should have listened. Now it is too late." I screenshotted the text and called the lawyer. She said save it and add it to the evidence folder. She also said the demand letter was going out tomorrow and we should expect a response within a week. I asked her what would happen if they ignored it. She said we would file in court and ask for an injunction, attorney fees, and damages for harassment. She said Montana judges did not like HOA boards that ignored their own rules. 2 days later, the demand letter went out. It was 4 pages long, and it cited multiple Montana statutes, the recorded covenants, and the timeline of Laura's harassment. It demanded that the board restore my amenities access within 48 hours, void all fines and lien threats, and issue a written apology. It also demanded that Laura cease all contact with me except through official HOA channels, and that the board investigate her conduct. The letter ended with a notice that if the demands were not met, we would file a lawsuit seeking damages, injunctive relief, and attorney fees. The lawyer sent it certified mail to the board and the management company. I did not hear anything for 3 days. Then I got a call from the management company. A man named Eric said he was the regional manager and he had reviewed my file. He said the board had acted improperly and the amenities lockout was being lifted immediately. He also said the fines and lien notice were being voided and removed from my account. I asked about Laura. He said the board was conducting an internal review and he could not comment further. I asked if my gate code would work. He said it should be active within the hour. I thanked him and hung up. I drove to the clubhouse and tried the gate code. It worked. I walked inside and checked the pool area. No one stopped me. I took a video of the working keypad and sent it to the lawyer. She said that was a good first step, but we were not done. She said we needed to make sure the board followed through on the internal review and that Laura faced consequences. I asked her what kind of consequences. She said removal from the board, at minimum. I said, how do we make that happen? She said we keep the pressure on and we let the other homeowners know what happened. Dennis called me that night and said the neighborhood email list was blowing up. He said someone had forwarded my demand letter to the full list and people were asking questions. He said at least 5 homeowners had replied all asking the board to explain the situation. He said Laura had not responded, but the other 2 board members had sent a joint email saying they were reviewing the matter and would provide an update at the next board meeting. Dennis said that was the first time he had ever seen the other board members contradict Laura publicly. I asked him what it meant. He said it meant Laura was losing control. The next board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept building my evidence folder. I added the police report, the text message, the camera footage of Laura's nighttime inspection, the emails, the demand letter, and Dennis's written statement. I also filed a formal complaint with the Montana HOA Regulatory Office, which Dennis told me existed specifically to handle cases like this. The complaint process required a detailed narrative and supporting documents. I wrote 10 pages and attached everything. The office confirmed receipt and said they would investigate. A week before the meeting, I got a call from one of the other board members, the woman who had looked uncomfortable at the emergency meeting. Her name was Sarah. She said she wanted to apologize for how things had been handled, and she had not realized the full extent of Laura's actions until she saw the demand letter. She said the board was holding a special session to discuss Laura's conduct, and she wanted to let me know that she and the other board member, whose name was Rick, were planning to ask for Laura's resignation. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said because Laura had been making decisions without consulting the rest of the board, and Sarah felt like she had been complicit by not speaking up sooner. I thanked her for the call. 2 days before the meeting, Laura sent an email to the full neighborhood list. Subject line: clarification on recent complaints. Body: It has come to my attention that false and defamatory statements have been circulated regarding my conduct as HOA president. I want to assure all residents that I have acted in accordance with my duties and the best interests of the community. The recent dispute with the new resident involved legitimate enforcement of HOA rules, and any claims of harassment or improper conduct are without merit. I have served this community faithfully for 3 years, and I will continue to do so. The board stands behind me, and we look forward to resolving this matter at the upcoming meeting. Dennis replied all within 5 minutes. He said Laura's characterization was inaccurate, and he had personally witnessed multiple violations of HOA procedures. He said the covenants were clear, and Laura had exceeded her authority. He attached his written statement and the covenant sections I had been citing. 3 other homeowners replied all in support of Dennis. One of them said Laura had threatened him with fines 2 years ago over a mailbox, and he had paid just to avoid the hassle. Another said Laura had locked her out of the pool last summer over a guest parking dispute. The thread turned into a full neighborhood pile-on. Laura did not reply again. The night of the meeting I showed up early. The room was packed. At least 30 residents were there, which Dennis said was triple the normal attendance. Laura was already at the front table with Sarah and Rick. She looked tense. Sarah called the meeting to order and said the first item on the agenda was a discussion of recent enforcement actions and board conduct. Laura interrupted and said this was not the appropriate forum for personal grievances. Sarah said the board had received multiple complaints and the homeowners deserved an explanation. Rick said he agreed. Laura said the complaints were based on misinformation and the board had acted properly. Sarah said she had reviewed the covenant language and the timeline of events, and she believed the board had overstepped. Laura said Sarah was not a lawyer, and she should not be making legal conclusions. Sarah said she did not need to be a lawyer to read the covenants. Rick said he had also reviewed the file, and he agreed with Sarah. Laura's face went red. She said if they did not support her, she would resign. Sarah said that might be the best option. The room went silent. Laura stood up and grabbed her papers. She said this was a coup and she would not be part of it. She said the board was making a huge mistake and the HOA would regret it. Then she walked out. The door slammed. Sarah looked at Rick. Rick looked at the audience. Sarah said the board would accept Laura's resignation effective immediately, and they would hold a special election to fill the vacancy. The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, Dennis came up to me and said that was the most satisfying thing he had seen in years. He said Laura had been a problem since day one, and it took someone like me refusing to back down to finally break her. I said I was just trying to build a fence. He laughed and said sometimes that is all it takes. The next day, the management company sent an email confirming that Laura Roberts was no longer HOA president, and all enforcement actions related to my property had been formally withdrawn. The email also said the board had voted to restore my amenities access with no restrictions and to issue a written apology for the improper suspension. The apology letter arrived 2 days later, signed by Sarah and Rick. It was short and polite, and it acknowledged that the board had acted without proper authority and caused me unnecessary stress. I forwarded it to the lawyer. She said we were done, and she would not charge me anything because the case had resolved without filing. I thanked her. I also received a notice from the Montana HOA Regulatory Office saying they had completed their preliminary investigation and found probable cause that the Pinecrest Village Fence Compliance Association had violated multiple sections of the state HOA law. They were opening a formal enforcement action, and the HOA would be required to implement corrective measures including board training, revised procedures, and oversight by the state office for 1 year. The notice said I would receive a copy of the final order once it was issued. A week later, I was outside staining the fence when a car pulled up. A woman got out and introduced herself as a reporter from the Billings Gazette. She said she had heard about the HOA dispute and she wanted to do a story on HOA overreach in Montana. I said I was not interested in being in the paper. She said the story was not just about me. It was about a pattern of abusive HOA boards across the state, and my case was a good example of how homeowners could fight back. I said I would think about it. She left her card. That night, Dennis called and said he had been contacted by the same reporter. He said he was going to do an interview because he thought the story needed to be told. He said Laura had gotten away with too much for too long, and maybe some public attention would keep the next board president from doing the same thing. I said I agreed. I called the reporter back and said I would talk. The story ran 2 weeks later. It was on the front page of the local section. The headline was, HOA President Resigns After Harassment Claims, State Investigation. The article included quotes from me, Dennis, and Sarah. It detailed Laura's actions, the demand letter, the board meeting, and the state investigation. It also mentioned that Laura had declined to comment. The article ended with a quote from a state legislator saying Montana needed stronger HOA accountability laws, and he was planning to introduce a bill in the next session. I framed a copy of the article and hung it in my garage. The fence was finished, stained, and looked great. My amenities access worked. The new board president, Sarah, had sent a welcome email to the neighborhood saying the board would be focusing on transparency and following the covenants. Dennis said it was the first time in years he felt like the HOA was actually run by the homeowners, instead of one person with a clipboard and a grudge. I did not see Laura again until 3 months later. I was at the grocery store and she was in the checkout line ahead of me. She did not look at me. She paid for her groceries and left. Dennis told me later that she had moved out of Pinecrest Village. He said she sold her house and relocated to a condo in a different part of town. He said the new owners were nice and they had already thanked him for the welcome packet he left on their porch. I still live in Pinecrest Village. The fence is holding up fine. I added a gate last month so I can access the back corner of my lot more easily. No one from the HOA said a word about it. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.